Welcome back to Operator Syndrome. I'm Patrick here with Steve, as always. Last time we were talking about Stolen Valor. That was an interesting one, a tear jerker. I'm sure all 10 of the people who listen to this were riveted. Today, we're going to get into some good stuff today. We're going to talk about some true frogman stories. So, leading up to talking about your experience, Steve's experience in Desert Storm, which I'm very interested in getting into. But first, we need to talk about some combat swimming, some combat diving. So on the tail end, if I recall this correctly, on the tail end of your first deployment to the Philippines, that was pretty eventful. It's you'd teased us with some combat diving story, and we were hoping you could get into that, Steve, and tell us about that experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was probably the most one of the most significant things we did. Certainly in that tour, putting down the coup and being ready to roll there was significant. But we did a very first. At least that's what we were told. I don't know. Maybe it might have been a first on the West Coast, and maybe they had a first on the East Coast, but I think it was the first. So one of our missions is to infiltrate an enemy coastline off of a submarine, usually a nuclear powered submarine. It's an incredibly stealthy way to get in because submarines, if you don't know, can hide under what's called thermocline layers, and they're really good at hiding. If they go deep enough, satellites and stuff can't pick them up. They're real sneaky. So, like Halo, locking out, we call it locking out of a submarine, meaning we're in the submarine and we get into a part of the submarine where they flood it up and we swim out. We literally swim out of the sub and go to the surface and either swim in or take rubber boats in. So that's one of our classic missions for a long time, is infiltrating off submarines. Now, in the old days, the way they would do it is you'd get these SEALs with scuba tanks on, and they would put us in torpedo tubes. They wouldn't have a torpedo in them, obviously, but it would be an empty tube, and the guys would just climb in and real cramped. And I never did it out of a torpedo tube, because what I'm getting to in this story is we found a better way to do it. But the old days, the guys would get in there with their scuba, and they would so they what's called flood up a tube, and that is the engineers on the submarine would adjust these valves, and these guys are sitting there in the tube, like where a torpedo would be, and you're say 100 feet below sea level or something, whatever it might be. So you have to equalize the pressure outside of the sub with inside the sub. So they flood it in. They can't do it too fast or blow your eardrums. So they would trickle it in. And then, water would be rising like this. And then, okay, here we go. Put in our scuba, and it would flood. And you'd start breathing and then clearing your ears, because as you go down in atmosphere, you have to clear your ears to regulate them, or they'll blow. So that's something you learn with scuba and all that. It's pretty straightforward stuff.
I'm sorry. We got to pause real quick, because you're talking about this like it's almost like it's nothing, like it's just business as usual, and this sounds insane. So, well, where to even begin? So I'm assuming there are no lights in a torpedo tube, right? Is it like a rifle barrel? I mean, there are no hatches or lights or anything on the inside, right?
No, chem lights. You'd take some chem lights.
Okay, so you take some chem lights.
What's what, and you would keep those pretty minimal, but yeah.
And so they would be, and you'd done this like to oh, some folks can't see, but sort of up, like the water's filling. But would that person be like laid out, like laying down inside the tube?
No,
or is
no.
it big enough that they could stand or squat or something like that?
You could sit, or it depends on whether it's a vertical tube or a horizontal tube. And like I say, I never had much experience with this, but I think there was plenty of room. I mean, these are big torpedoes, so you could sit with like your back against the wall, or stand if it was a vertical launch tube. But that's where I have to stop, because I never did it, and I always heard about it, and I saw pictures, but yeah, you had room to be more or less quote unquote comfortable as they're flooding this thing up. But
I get
it's not for those who are claustrophobic. That would not be a place you'd want to be if you had the tendency to freak out in closed spaces, because you're not getting out of there until they open that thing up.
so what happens if they get that the pressure equalization? What if they get that wrong? What could happen to you?
Could kill you if it's bad. If it's a drastic enough shift, could blow your eardrums out. I mean, it could go from blowing your eardrums to getting the bends, which
Right.
is something you would get in other scuba applications if you didn't adjust pressure and ascend at a proper rate, or kill you. I mean, it could just crush you if it was too much, too quick. And there were stories of guys getting messed up. I don't know about any deaths. Oh well, actually, there was it was called the USS Grayback, and I believe some guys got killed on that doing a lockout back in the day. But this is real fuzzy, and it was before my time. But I remember guys talking about the USS Grayback, and I think some SEALs, or at least one guy got killed or badly hurt, something like that. So,
And the whole idea going through all this effort is it just to keep the submarine from being exposed on the top side or above
yeah,
the waves? Is that purely what it is?
yeah, yeah, total clandestine, and they don't want, they don't want, they want to get the SEALs out without this. Yeah, if submarine surfaces, then boom, they're targeted, they're targetable, by satellite or planes or whatever is looking for them. So they want to stay under there, and they want to stay at some depth that gives them cover by these thermocline layers. And I don't know, depending on where they are, thermocline layers are they're very diverse depending on what type of water. Are you in the tropics? Are you in the North Sea? Stuff like that.
That's very interesting. And so this lockout procedure that you all were piloting or rehearsing, this didn't require you to get in the cramped confines of a tube or a launch tube or something like that.
That's right. They came up with a new concept, and now it's just a dime a dozen. Everybody does it this way. It's just way better, way more controlled. And so the Navy came up with a thing called a DDS, dry deck shelter. Okay. So they would take, and I don't know what kind of submarines they use these days. We were first generation with this stuff. And I think the one we did it on was the USS Sam Houston. It was a nuclear powered submarine. It was what was called a 686. These are dinosaurs. These are in museums nowadays. Okay, everybody. And it was a dinosaur back then, actually. It was a nuclear powered sub. So plenty of long distance power indefinitely, months and months and months they never run out of power, but you'd run out of food before you would power. And what they did was they filled the torpedo tubes, from what I understand, they filled them with concrete. And so what was used to be called a fast attack, they now called a slow attack. It was just a joke because they were so heavy. They weren't fast, but they were, medium speed, but not like they used to be when they didn't have these, what were their chambers were filled with like concrete. And so I don't know why they did that, or I don't know, maybe it was a ballast thing or whatever. But anyhow, it was the USS Sam Houston. I'm sure it's long decommissioned by now. And on top of the submarine, like if it's above water, there's this long cigar-shaped looking chamber. It looks like a submarine on top of a submarine, kind of a cigar-shaped. It was probably 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall by 7, 8 feet wide, 10 feet wide, maybe. And it had on the back end, it had a big door that would swing open, hydraulically would swing open. And then you'd just be looking in this chamber, this tube. And it's big enough. Okay. So there were 2 applications. One is, so there are 2. Well, now I don't know how many there were. Back in the day, there were 2 what's called SDV units, sealed delivery vehicle units. And what those are mini submarines. They're mini submarines that SEALs can drive like James Bond, like drive these suckers in to wherever. And again, it's clandestine. So you're underwater. Some of them, I never was at an STV unit, so I really didn't know. I got the briefings and buds, and we got to see them and we got to look in them. And some of them are pretty high speed, pretty high. That's where you get into some classified stuff. I remember in buds, the day we looked at the STV units, the officers that were foreign nationals, they said, you guys can't see this part of it. You got to just wait out here and we'll get with you later, because they didn't have the clearances to see some of this. Some of it's pretty high speed. So anyway, so you could fit one of these mini subs in this thing. So it were sizable, and these things are, well, I don't know. I'll just say you could get anywhere from 2 to 6 or 8 SEALs on board one of these things and drive it wherever. So, so the DDS, the dry deck shelter, one mission was to launch a mini submarine. And then the other mission, and this is what we did in my first platoon, was to launch an entire platoon of SEALs out of it, because it had plenty of room. The old days, you could get 2 guys in a torpedo tube. I mean, maybe there were multiple torpedo tubes, so you could get more than 2 guys out, but it was real cramped and real stodgy, and it was not the best way to do it. Well, these things were cool because you could put, there were benches on both sides, and you could put a squad on one side and a squad on the other side, and you'd be facing each other. They had hookah regulators, which were no more scuba tanks because they're clunky. They just had internal air coming off the submarine, and you could just take this thing and pop it in your mouth, and with a mask on, and you're good, you're groovy, and plenty of air. You don't have to worry about running out of air, because it's the submarine's compressed air system. So there's tons of it. Scuba tanks, you got to get moving, because you run out of air, you're out of air. And, it better be out of there before, it runs out, because, man, there's no reversing that process. That's why the old torpedo tube days were really kind of risky. So anyway, so you had this big chamber, and then you had operators. You had, I don't know if they were always SEALs. I think they were SEALs from the diving department. And they sat on the other side. It's kind of hard to explain all this, but there was a plexiglass window that created a bubble, an air bubble. And they could talk on the comms, and you could actually hear it. And they're controlling everything. And they're sitting in the same chamber, looking at you. And we're on the outside of the plexiglass bubble, but we're all, under the same pressure. And they're giving signals, and like, everybody okay? You're at this depth, and they could, so it was kind of cool. And then in between where we sat facing each other on the walls of the dry deck shelter was tons of gear. So we had weapons, we had waterproof bags of gear, and we had deflated Zodiac raiding craft that were, I mean, they're pretty big, but they fit right in between us. I mean, it was pretty crowded. But we had all our gear. We had big, huge CO2 cylinders to inflate the Zodiacs once we got on the surface. We had scuba tanks. Everything. And we could get a lot of stuff in there. It would have been about the size of a Chinook in the inside.
Okay.
Roughly, yeah. To give a good, benchmark. So you can get quite a, yeah.
Was the idea that, I guess, you could access this through the submarine?
That's right.
That was the whole idea. So you come up through the submarine, you get set up, you got your gear pre-staged, you get kitted up, flood it. I'm relying on purely video games and movies to try to picture this now. So it floods, open the door, go out, do your thing, come back, and then I guess you could get the water out. Get the water out and then go back down. Is that kind of the sequence?
Right. That's right. You could flood it up, flood it down, and equalize the pressure. Yeah, it's kind of cool, man. It's kind of, I thought this is the coolest thing I ever, we would climb up from the inside of the submarine. And we've been on this thing for like 2 weeks. We did our workup in the Philippines. And that's another thing. The water there, we learned how to go in and out. We did, I don't know how many drills to make sure we could do it. Because our operation was part of Operation Full Eagle, which is a readiness exercise against North Korean aggression, and we were a part of that. And this was what we were doing, and the first time ever the dry deck shelter was being employed, and it was cool because you climb up through the submarine. It's like a round tube, and you're climbing a ladder up into this chamber, and then once we all got up in there and our gear was all up, stashed and everything, then this big, like round lid comes down, and then they yoke it down, and it's like totally sealed off from the rest of the sub. And then they start flooding it in, and here comes the water, and you see it covers your feet, comes up your calf, and you're like, all right, here we go. And it took a while, man, like over an hour at least to get it all flooded up and regulated, like to where because when they open that door, man, if there's a shift, if the pressure inside the chamber is off with outside the chamber, you could blow guys' eardrums easy, because that pressure is going to equalize like that.
Right.
So it had to be really like on the nuggets, and but it was, and it went off flawlessly. And so after we had been on the submarine for over a week, and I'll tell you something, I am, that is not my calling, being on a submarine.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like again, there's so much that's interesting about this. None of what you've said appeals to me in any way. So I am very happy with choosing the Army. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that. But I mean, submarine life. So you're on a submarine for a few weeks. What's that? I mean, what I know about submarines, I haven't run into some folks who were on submarines before. It's cramped.
Mm-hmm.
There's no extra space. And all space is taken, is accounted for. So where were you? And of course, as always, we watch, whatever's classified. You don't say anything. You don't need to say anything. But generally, can you speak to, okay, so you've got the crew of a submarine, and then you've got a platoon of SEALs. How does that work for 2 weeks? How does that? Where do you all stay?
We slept. They gave us some racks, because this was only a SEAL mission. The submarine wasn't doing anything but dry deck shelter and pioneering that new venture.
Okay.
They didn't need all of the crew spaces that they would normally need for like torpedo men, and because it was just our mission. So we did have racks. We each had a rack, and we didn't have to hot rack, what's called hot racking.
Yeah.
On regular subs, where they're after a serious business mission, guys have to sleep in watches and share racks because there's not enough space.
Yeah, that's insane. I feel like I've heard that up to 3 people could share one bed.
One bed.
Insane.
Yeah, it's insane. You don't even have it's not much space. And like the showers, it's like we called them Navy showers. It's like you got squirt, 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 get wet, lather up, and squirt it all off in like 2 minutes, and then you're out of there. Like there's not, it's really lean and mean, and and it's cramped. There's nowhere to go. They had put some exercise bicycles for us in between these old torpedo tubes, and we'd get in there and try to get some PT. And there was a pull-up bar. We had a pull-up bar, but it was like just doing 8-count bodybuilders and stuff was almost, it was so little space. Anyway, it was boring. It was it made you go nut. After 2 or 3 days, so you haven't seen the sun, it's like, get me off this thing. And then they would dive, we would go down to like 600-700 feet, and as they dove, like all the stuff I didn't know, because it's my first time on a submarine, and you could hear the skin of the submarine would compress, and the thing would go, and I'm like, what's that noise? Why is it squeaking like that? And they're like, oh, it's supposed to do that. It's us going down 1,000 feet or something. And I'm like, well, I don't like it. That doesn't sound cool. So anyway, all this world, and fortunately there was like a lounge area with a TV, and they had 1 million videos. This is back in the days of cassette videos, or
VCRs.
VCRs, yeah, it wasn't even DVDs. And we watched so many movies because we were just bored out of our skulls.
Well, I think first off, again, for the 10 listeners, I think that the absolute best submarine documentary that's out there is Down Periscope with
Oh,
it's
I haven't
actually
seen it.
you haven't seen it. It's actually a comedy, but it
Oh, okay.
has the guy from Frasier in it. It's hilarious. You need to check it out. I think I saw it on YouTube somewhere. You can
I
watch it
gotta
for
check
free
it
with
out.
ads, unless you have YouTube Premium. There's an ad for them. They should return the favor. But so what was that? So you're on the sub for a few weeks. You all don't do anything. You don't contribute to moving the sub along.
No,
How did that? What was the relationship like with the submariners? I guess that's what
yeah,
you call them.
submit.
What was it? I'm sure some of you were interested, inquisitive, asking
Yep.
questions. Were they receptive to that? Were they like, leave me alone? I gotta sleep in a bed with two other people here in
Yeah.
a second? Or like, what was that like?
No, they were pretty receptive. We had a great rapport because they thought we were cool and I thought they were cool. Like I went to the reactor room. I mean, we had
Mhm.
access anywhere. So the coolest thing for me was going into a nuclear reactor and asking the physicists, like who are monitoring a freaking nuclear reaction going on.
Mhm.
I'm like, tell me about this and tell me about this. He's like, well, these are the control rods, and here's how we keep it from melting down. And I'm like, I had a million questions and just thought it was fascinating. And I'm like, how do you make the air down here? Like, and there's this whole thing that makes air out of, it's a scrubber of some sort, like kind of like a Draeger rig where it takes seawater and makes oxygen and air to breathe. And I'm like, how do you get rid of the garbage? And they're like, well, we put it in here and it just, kind of farts it out into the ocean and things eat it, like, you know, everything from food waste to human waste.
Mhm.
And it's incredible. It's a whole, and these things can stay down for, well, like I say, the only limiting factor would be food, and they can make their own water. They have desalination plants on it, so
Mhm.
unlimited water. Yeah, it was just it's a world of its own, and we got along well. And they were always asking us questions. Wow, what are you guys doing? And we're like, well, we don't know. We're locking out of this baby and going into the coast. So, but what we did do, one of the things we did is plan our op. So we were given, op orders and, briefs and all that. And one of the funny stories there was this chief in my platoon. He was he was an interesting guy. And he was always giving new guys a bunch of crap. Well, I was the point man and I had to plan the navigation and what gear we needed. So our operation was to lock out of this thing 40 miles off the coast of South Korea, drive Zodiac boats with, I think we had 35 horsepower engines. Yeah. Which it was a long way to go 40 miles with 35 horsepower engines and choppy seas and freezing cold seas, hit the beach, link up with the rock seals or Republic of Korea, South Korean seals, and rendezvous, and then patrol in, I think it was 6 or 8 kilometers up a mountain to find a site that we were going to strike the next day. So this is like all night operation. And I mean, we didn't even make it to the rendezvous well, we didn't make it to the site we were going to strike. We had to lay up for a whole day and then strike it the next night, patrol back out, get our boats, drive back out, link up with the submarine, get back into the submarine, and then take off. Right? It was like one of the longer ops I've ever done. It was 2 days, and so that's what we were supposed to do. So here I am with maps and charts, old school, no GPS, trying to figure out. All right, I got to patrol. This is totally foreign country, and it's completely black, pitch black, and going in these mountain passes and stuff. So I'm like planning and planning and planning because I got to lead this thing. And I'm just thinking, so I'm looking on this chart and there's a river. I can see there's a river we got to cross. I said, hey, chief, because he was asking me, what do we need? What kind of gear? I said, we're going to need river and stream crossing gear, which means fins, carabiners, ropes, all kinds of stuff to get across a river. And you don't know how fast the water's moving too. Once we would get a rope secured then we could just bean her in and just pull our way across it.
Right.
But somebody's got to swim that first. Somebody's got to get to the other side. So you need fins, you need life jackets, all kinds of stuff to get across it. So I said, well, we're going to need a lot of river and stream crossing gear. And he said, he looked at it. He goes, nah, I don't think we need to take all that gear, because I think that's kind of more of an intermittent stream, and we can just kind of walk our way across it. And I was like, it doesn't look like one to me. It looks like a serious river, and I think we need this gear. He goes, nah, we'll be out good without it, because you're always trying to cut, extra gear, and you don't want to hump it. So that's I'll continue that story. But we were planning the op, doing the order. So finally it comes to that night, and we're ready to lock out. We've been on this thing for, like I say, over a week. We'd gone from the Philippines, and the water there was warm, and we knew it was going to be colder in South Korea, but we didn't realize how much colder. I just remember we're in the dry deck shelter. We got all our gear. We're ready. It's 0 hour. We're going. And they started flooding it up. And I'm like, whoa, because I could feel it on my feet coming up. I'm like, this is cold. This is a lot colder than the Philippines. And it was like bathtub water down there. And I was like, this is going to be a long night. Well, anyway, so they flooded up. They opened the big chamber. So what we do is we put a buoy up. We send out a buoy that goes to the surface, and then we tighten that buoy up to the submarine. And the submarine can't stop completely still. So it's got to go maybe 2 knots minimum forward speed. So it's pulling us. I mean, like pulling us along slowly, but it can't just stall out. It's got to keep some sort of, I don't know why. You'd have to ask a submariner or a captain of a sub or something. So there's a buoy on the top. And then now we beam her into the line running from the sub inside the dry deck shelter to the buoy. And so the first guy goes up. He's on the surface. So he's ready to start receiving gear. So I think the first thing, you swim up you have a guy in the submarine with scuba on that escorts guys to the surface. And so you just kind of piggyback, and you breathe off his extra regulator. So it's got an extra regulator on it, and you just breathe off his and just piggyback him up and go to the surface. And then once you're on the surface, you don't need scuba anymore. So you're there. And then he goes back down, gets another guy, brings him up. And then he goes back down and brings up the 50. Actually, I think they just put the Zodiac they beamer it in and just shove it up, and we grab it, and it's already got the CO2 cylinder in it. And we just crank that open, and it starts to inflate. So now we've got a platform, and then other guys are coming up. There's the whole platoon, so it takes a while to get everybody up there, all the gear up. Sure. So you're just swimming it up, and we're still hooked to the submarine, because if you get unhooked, that thing's going on without you. And right. It's black. It's hard to find people on the surface. So anyway, we get everybody up. Finally, the second boat is ready. We get it inflated, and then we cut away. So, all right. So that was that piece, getting out of that sub. And then they went back down in, closed it back up, drained it, climbed back into the submarine, all the guys helping us, all the support crew. And then we're off and running on our own up on the surface. And we're like getting maps and charts ready. I mean, no GPS in these days. It's like, compass better work. You better have good bearings, because here we go. And we were pretty sure where the submarine let us off in the right spot, because they had high-speed gear or high-speed instruments. But now we're just now the guys driving the Zodiacs are just doing navigation off their compasses. And so here we are, and it's like the seas were not cooperative. It was like boom, boom, and cold water splashing over you for a couple hours. And I mean, we had headaches. We were just like, God, I can't believe the boat. I can't believe it was like, I think it was over an hour, but maybe pushing 2 hours to get into the coast. And then
later on, we need to connect that to probable TBI, right?
Oh, yeah.
Doing that kind of stuff.
Easily. Yeah. I mean, we all had headaches by the time we got to the beach. I mean, just
That's pretty
slamming
serious.
and slamming and slamming for hour, over an hour. And so, and in cold water on top of that, I swear, when we got to the beach, we were so cold. I don't know if we had the dexterity to get the safety off our weapons. I really don't. It was like that cold. And guys we were in that buds mode of like uncontrollable shivering.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, dang, man, we got to get moving so we can get our warmed up. Anyway, we were all so freaking cold. So I'm the point man. We slither our way up to the beach. The boats are still standing offshore. We sent swimmer scouts in, which is a thing we do. And I was one of the swimmer scouts because I was a point man. Some other guys came in to cover us to set security on the beach. And, there's a lot of tension on those beaches because of North Korea. And they are some really well-guarded beaches. And we were just thinking, hey, I hope we're in South Korea. And I hope we're on target where we're supposed to be. We were pretty sure we were. We were pretty far south. But we were also like, I hope we're on the right beach. In other words, the one where our counterparts are ready to meet up with us, because if we're on the wrong beach, and it wouldn't be that hard to do,
right?
They're thinking they're being invaded. They might have thought we were North Korean. So it was like, damn. So we were like patrol. And then we were slithering our way across the beach to where I thought we were supposed to link up. And we had a bona fide, which is like, our number was 13. So our South Korean counterparts knew the number was 13. They had been briefed through their intel, and we knew it was 13. So the way that would work is, we want to find out, are you friendlies? Are you the friendlies we're supposed to link up with? So I would yell out a number. So 13 was the sum of that number. So I yelled out 9. So the answer would be 4, because 4 plus 9 is 13, I think. Yeah. I'm not a math major, but so I yelled out 9. I'll never forget, because the South Korean, we were in the right spot, and those were our guys. We had lined it up right. And I saw him. I finally saw him. We had nods, so I could see where he was. And they signaled with an infrared light a series of flashes. So I knew, okay, pretty sure this is it. So I yelled 9. And I think it was a challenge, because they spoke Korean primarily, a little bit of English, but not much. And they're having to do math and see. And so, without going into a whole dramatic thing, the number he gave me back, I couldn't make it out. I'm like, but it was the accent and, other things. I'm like, couldn't quite hear too well. I was like, 9 again. And I hear, and finally it sounded like what sounded like fa, like fa. And I figured that's 4 with a Korean accent, South Korean accent. So I was like, okay, good. We're good.
Close enough.
Okay, close enough. And
close
we linked up.
Somebody get me a jacket.
Yeah, close enough. So we linked up, got the boats all stashed. We had to camouflage them, stash them where they were most likely not be found. And that took a good hour to get all the boats, carry them over the beach, get brush and camo nets and everything over them. And then finally I'm headed out doing another map reset and like shooting my azimuths, and okay. And it is pitch black, like no moon, no love there. It's like, this is going to be dead reckoning. I can tell the whole way. We had a little bit of terrain features, that we could follow if we could see them. So anyway, so we start off. It felt good to start walking because we were so cold, just getting the blood flowing. So we come finally to that stream that the chief said.
Yep. The brook, the babbling brook.
The little intermittent stream.
Yeah.
I took one look. I was the first one there. And I looked, and we were overlooking it. It was the size of the Ohio River. I kid you not.
Like we should have just driven the sub right up
there. It just dropped us off on the other side. Yeah, it was enormous. And I said, so I did the halt, and they were like, what now? I said, send the chief up. He comes up and he goes, what's up? I said, you see that? He goes, he's looking, and I said, let your eyes adjust. He goes, looks like a big river. I said, that's your intermittent stream that we were going to walk across. Clearly that wasn't happening. I mean, it was huge. And so we didn't have the gear because Chief made the call, and we didn't have the river and stream crossing gear. So I said, the only way we're going to get across this is there's a bridge about half click upstream, an actual road, which is a big no-no,
Right.
You're trying to get in clandestinely. I said, we're just going to have to bite the bullet and go across that bridge, or it's going to be all night. I don't even know if we can make it across this. We don't have any ropes, or we're going to swim it all, guys with 60s. I mean, so we did. So we made it to that bridge, and we did okay, let's just dead sprint across. It was a long bridge, and it was like, I think we did it a fire team at a time. One fire team just takes off, hopes, prays, nothing's coming. And we did. We made it across. The one vehicle came in between our sprinting across it, and we were all totally, they couldn't see us. And that vehicle went across, and then we got the team across. But it was like, okay, this is not really the way you want to do things, but you got it. That was the only way.
That's just like the Chief had planned it. That's
just
exact. That's what it was, a learning opportunity for you. That's what.
And for the Chief. I think he would maybe pay a little more attention to his point man next time. But
you were clearly right. But also, it sounds like, okay, this is like a pretty big river. Now, I only did a river crossing in Ranger School, but it was certainly no Ohio River, right? It was certainly no like legit river. So, so we're coming up on time. When you did the strike, or was it just like blank fire? Was it like an ambush, something like that? It
was blowing up a SAM site.
Oh, okay.
So it was all simulated. It was training op, but we got there. That was uneventful. The eventful stuff was just getting there. And the last thing I'll leave you with as we're running down is we nearly got run over by the submarine periscope coming out. Because the periscope flashes an infrared light. We have nods, and we're coming out to meet with them. And it's moving. It's going like 10 knots or more. And I thought a periscope was a little bitty thing that was like in the cartoons. It was huge. And it just went, we were like, whoa, go right. This thing went whoosh, like right by us. It was like, oh, damn, that thing could have killed us. I mean, it was really big. A periscope, I mean, it was like 5-6 feet across. I mean, so anyway,
proper end to a proper Frogman story. We're going to talk about Desert Storm next time. Thank you all for listening. Catch you later.